Thank you.
I want to immediately take you to the Matters NYS, and for this I'll just go inside. It's not on the front page today, and this is on page, almost there. Good, we're there. Page 18 of the Standard, and for those of you who had a chance to glance at The Nation, it's on the front page, and I'll tell you about the headline in just a bit. But on page 18 of the Standard, NYS paid firms billions for supplying air, team told. Honorable Halwale, we were here with you last week.
Yeah.
We were talking about this. The revelations are even worse. More than half of the companies that have been investigated or that are being investigated in this scandal were promptly paid more than 1 billion Kenya shillings, delivered nothing. Even worse, the company's directors told investigators that they were called and offered complete procurement documents, despite never bidding for tenders. I don't know where this happens in other parts of the world. And sources involved in the probe yesterday confirmed pending arrests of both the recipients and officials who facilitated payments against fake deliveries. If you get a copy of the Daily Nation on the front page, the headline is Kavura Season 2. A lady who never bid for this. Actually, the documents were brought to her. She just, I guess, filled them under instruction, handed them over, and a couple of days later, 60 million Kenya shillings was deposited in her account without her having to do much for it. Let me start with you, Honorable Halwale, and just get your thoughts on what is now going from worrying to simply ridiculous.
It is terrible. In my community, a story is told of a man, an adult, who was walking on the road, and on the way, he found an adult raping a little girl and looked the other way. So when the matter was brought up before the elders Baraza, the verdict was the guy who was raping was a lesser offender than the guy who looked the other way. So they prescribed and sentenced him that his eyes should be gouged out. So what I learned from this story is that the heads of the investigatory institutions in this country have deliberately been looking the other side when the little girl called the Kenyan economy is being raped. So they should have their eyes gouged out. The fact that this has been taking place when there is a working criminal investigation department, when there's a working in office EACC, and when there's a working in office of DPP, it speaks volumes that these people are simply looking the other way. Maybe, Houghton, as we were mentioning earlier on, the reason why it has come out is maybe because of the sweeping changes that the president made in the criminal department and in the DPP.
DPP, exactly.
Yeah, maybe this is why it's happening. It's just a matter of time before the cartels also capture them, then they also keep quiet.
That's a bad prophecy.
Yeah.
Irungu, come in.
So in 2015, which I guess is Kavura 1, as the nation would put it, a number of organizations, including Transparency International, Muzalendo Trust, then I was working with the Society of International Development, studied very carefully what was happening within the NYS and the Ministry of Devolution. And as we began to press for 30% of, that time, 30% of Uhuru Kenyatta's cabinet to go home because of the many scandals that were happening in the different ministries, I received a phone call from a friend, an acquaintance, let me put it that way, who said to me, Rungu, why are you following yesterday's news? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the person who used to be at the Ministry of Health has now moved, leaving that scandal, to the Ministry of Transport. If you look at the suppliers who were yesterday's pharmacists, they are today's road contractors. And I learned two things about corruption. One is that it is pervasive and it also morphs. It also transforms itself. It moves with individuals. So for those of our duty bearers, those who are in the national intelligence, the criminal investigation, the first thing you have to recognize is that when you begin to follow the money, you will be able to track it through a number of different, I guess what you call a number of different corridors in which little interests have begun to develop. And it is pervasive. The second point is this one, is that, you know, when we look at the case of NYS, what's very clear for me is that what we did not do in 2015 is we did not look at the middle level of the civil service, the procurement officers. Those who misuse their rather they, let's say not misuse because they're very intentional, those who give their passwords to other parties to be able to use them between hours in which there is no oversight. I think these are the two areas that if I was pursuing this to its logical conclusion, this is what I would focus on.
Political responsibility. We are dealing, so in this sense, it seems they're first dealing with those who were hands-on, you know, with the passwords or, you know, in procurement or accounts, etc. But political responsibility, who should bear political responsibility in this matter? How far up should it go in your view, once all the revelations are out?
It should be right at the very top. Many Kenyans have this belief, and I am tempted to share with them, that President Uhuru is not corrupt. Many Kenyans.
You said you're tempted to share that with them.
Yes.
Why tempted? Why not? You're either sharing it with them.
Because you will challenge me to give factual proof.
He's worried about the Cyber Crimes Act and various other things.
Yes, yes. and for that reason, I would like to go just one level below him, and that is his cabinet ministers. Let me tell you why you cannot fix this thing without going that high. Before the year 2012, there were cartels in Mumias Sugar Company who were suppliers and contractors and doing all manner of things before 2012. But after the elections of 2013, all those people became suppliers and contractors in the county government of Nairobi.
County government of Nairobi?
Yes, I'm telling you.
Where's the proof? Again, you told us.
The names are there.
Okay.
Yeah. So they started doing business with the county government of Nairobi, which means that if somebody had hit at the very top in Mumias at that time, that nonsense would not have been transferred to Nairobi. So we must do it right at the top. And there is no shortcut. Those of us who have been speaking to the issue of the need to fight corruption, Irungi is here, I'm here. We've been doing it for so long that nobody listens to us anymore. Our speeches on corruption are no longer attractive. If anything, we are the ones who are being labeled that we are corrupt. For example, anytime I tweet on my Twitter handle about corruption, the youth will hit me back and say, Kidero about you in Mumias when you were supposed to fight for the farmers. So they just give you a bad name, and that name sticks, and there's nothing you can do about it.
In a sense, blacklist you or something of the sort.
Yes. So as to confuse you, it's not very easy. To get people like Irungu. He also has appetites for big cars and to also own a chop and so on. But he has chosen to walk the thin, straight line for the sake of this country.
So there's a point I think the party leaders made which is very important. The appetite for big things is probably at the root of many of these problems. If you look at it culturally, the absence of morality, the absence of ethical values is really driven by a sense of people wanting to own more than they need. So actually one of the reasons that I stay sane in this crazy jungle we call Kenya, where there are big fives and big fours and so on, is basically by not having a big appetite. You know, I drive the same vehicle.
Where do they learn this big appetite? Where do they get it from?
No, it's
not taught in schools, is it?
It's entertainment. It is the living large that we see in our government offices, the state officers who live beyond their means. And actually what we realize now is those means are even mostly our taxes, not just in terms of their salaries, but what we're seeing now in terms of billions and billions of shillings. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have not created yet a muscle in this country that allows us to basically generate citizens who are ready to report. For every person, I think her name is Anne Girita, the woman at the center of this particular edition of NYS. For every Anne, there is at least 10 Kenyans who knew what was happening,
yes,
who were very intimately connected with the information that would have needed to bring them down before it got to this stage. They said nothing. And that is the point that Bonnie is raising.
Yes, and just to follow it up on the issue of the appetite for things that you don't need. Take the round one of this scandal. There was a young man called Ben Getty. Ben Getty, as soon as he put his hands on the 500 million, he was all over town buying property. To buy property is a process that you go through institutions, the documents must be authenticated and whatnot, must be cleared. Why did a single person say, wait a minute, why is one person just buying things every day, more than 10 things in a week and so on?
Maybe they won the lottery.
That's right.
But we never saw them on TV.
We never saw them on TV.
So which lottery was this one?
Let me introduce Steve Ogola, advocate. Welcome to the program, Steve. I think you know what we are talking about. It's been the discussion in Kenya, I would say, for the last 2 weeks. Let me get your thoughts on this and the role of the law. And I think I'm very glad today that I have a very varied panel from different sectors. And I want to hear sort of from the law perspective where we are in this.
I think the first thing to emphasize is that there's a critical breach of trust because those who hold public offices do so in trust that they will apply those offices to the benefit of the people and in the manner in which the law has intended. So when these scandals emerge, it's a serious indictment on those that we've held, those who've given those opportunity to occupy those offices. The second place, it shows that the Constitution is being falsified in a very significant way, because if you look at Article 10, the design of governance is that of participation, deliberation, negotiation, openness, transparency, and accountability. That has been falsified. It shows that the people are basically being involved in governance based on rumors and guesswork. We really don't know how you're being governed. There's a lot of opaqueness, and that is not consistent with the open governance partnership that the government has signed into. I think what we need, the person that needs to take the blame, first of all, is the institution that holds this country together, the presidency. Because the presidency, without a stable and firm leadership, the ripple effect is real. These corruption scandals that are emerging now, there are many that will emerge in the future. It shows that the corruption.
Read the future.
There are many. You know, we are just being told about what has been discovered. There are those that will be discovered in the future. It shows that there's a critical gap of understanding between public officers and what the president cares for or stands for publicly. Because he stated publicly that he doesn't condone corruption. But how come his officers do not take his word, to it? It shows that in terms of leadership, because corruption, to fight corruption, even to contain it, because Transparency International did in their corruption perception index, puts Kenya at number 143 out of a possible 183 countries, 186 countries assessed. It shows that to deal with corruption requires both mid-term and long-term measures. The mid-term measures requires firm and stable leadership. Every institution or corporation that is involved in corruption, there is a line ministry aligned to it. If I were the president, I would fire that cabinet secretary as a strong signal.
Which one?
In the first, you see these semi-autonomous government agencies, parastatals and other state departments, they are organized around some ministries. The minister answers the president, and overall, it is not open the president to say that I'm helpless, because he's the one who coordinates and supervises. The overall responsibility of responding or maybe accounting to the republic lies with the president. If his people are not being held accountable, then he needs to fire them as the strongest signal. Then in the long term, we've always argued, we must interrogate how people enter into government. If you enter government through a process that is already manipulable, a process that is not accountable, you don't know how people got money that they used to campaign to enter into those offices, the presumption is once they enter into those offices, they already co-opted into the philosophy of accumulation, of primitive accumulation of wealth. And when they get there, the first thing they want to do within the first 2 years is to recoup the money that they spent in the campaign through these state parastatals. So sometimes when you look at this corruption, you must look at them in the broader context. Whose bidding are they doing? You'll see Omolo now being fired. But who is Omolo representing? I think Irungu already indicated that when you see these people, brazen theft, pilferage, wastage of public resources, it is being done to the benefit of someone. That is the person you need to discover. Because if we don't answer that question, you will circulate this team out, bring another team, then they'll be co-opted into that philosophy, and then corruption will persist and deepen.
I think Steve is raising a very important point. The first thing we have to recognize is that actually the cartels have their own state offices. You know, there was an intern in our office before the elections, and the intern came to me and said, Irungu, I think we should just give up with political parties. No disrespect to Fort Kenya. We should just give up with parties. All of them. Let us just ask the cartels to run for elections. The sugar cartel will run against the wheat cartel, against the maize cartel, will run against the drugs cartel. Whoever wins runs the country. At least we know who we're dealing with. It was a bit of a cynical, sad comment from a 25-year-old.
25-year-old.
25-year-old. So this is, you know, another 20 years of this person will be an active citizen or inactive and cynical, depending on which way they go in the next few years.
Goodness.
But the point there for me is that each cartel has its own state officers. So you have to be very careful in the context of reconstituting or replacing officials who have failed, not to bring in essentially another cartel's state officials. So I think the route for this is three things. One is thorough investigation by the institutions. We cannot rely on one institution. We have to allow several institutions to have the capacity to investigate and to prosecute. Because what we've seen with the funnel of EACC, DPP, and then courts is that if the line of conviction or the line of prosecution is so long that you can actually stop it at about 6 different points. And if we had time, I would tell you a story about a woman who ended up in a very strange place who told me how she subverts the courts. And she has a whole chain
I'll
of
come
people.
back to you
we'll come back
for
to
that.
So the key point is, do not shuffle state officials until you are sure the people you are putting in do not come with their own cartels.
Honorable Halwale, NYS Season 1. If it had been dealt with decisively,
Sounds like a series now.
would we have been here today, in your view?
Of course not. And let me just add a word in that respect on what Council has said. It is not enough for the president to sack cabinet secretaries. The sacking should not end there. There should be a follow-up so that we see convictions.
Yeah.
We see conviction. I'm a hardliner on some things for which I'm not very popular. For example, if the court has ruled that they are sending somebody for capital punishment, that the person must hang, there should be follow-up so that the public can see that person hanging. Otherwise, when you don't do it, it just becomes drama. Drama, what do I mean? Look at what we saw in the papers 2 days ago. Somebody has ordered that the house of Engineer Kamau, former cabinet secretary, you know, they stormed the place. Years after the act. So they're just treating us to drama. 2009. If they had concluded that case at that time, they had punished Kamau, then we would be knowing when you steal 33 million shillings in the case of Kamau, then
and again, he's going to be charged, so it's a court process.
Yeah.
So we'll wait and see how the court deals.
But Wahiga, on this issue, I think, I disagree with my other colleague. Well, actually, he's a learned colleague, but from a medical nature. I think the death penalty is not the way to go. But
there are those who say that's what needs to happen in this country.
No, death penalty is archaic, it is old, it has been proven not to work.
You're not wearing your human rights hat.
I always, in fact, my hat, not my hat. But the more important thing is, I think, asset seizure. So if we saw people going if we saw the CID going into people's homes and sealing them off, asking the family and all the domestic workers and so on to leave the property because that property is property of interest.
If I have 10 properties,
seize all of them. Go for all 10 of them. Seize them while the court case is taking place. That would be the equivalent of a death penalty, but it would be a serious deterrent in the cases that we are seeing around the country. I don't believe, as the NCCK has argued, that we need to give amnesty. In fact, I think it's a misuse of an organization I work for, that word. I don't think we need to give amnesty. Because I think what that will do, essentially, it will allow for one group of thieves to depart and another group will come in. And then they will ask for amnesty again. And we'll have this circus of a cycle. So I think the first thing is we have to look at why are assets not being seized prior to convictions.
Steve.
I think what we need to understand is in terms of the judicial processes, does this government, do we really have a corruption risk assessment tool that will help us map out the key stages? Because if one stage is hidden or falsified, and then you want to for PR purposes, you want to arrest the top person, without the evidence, once you can't assign some evidential, if you can't discharge the evidentiary burden of proof at that higher level, then you will not secure the conviction. I think what the government has not done is to share with Kenyans, and this they must do. Every ministry, have they designed a corruption risk assessment tool that allocates that in terms of procurement processes, these are the critical stages where corruption is likely to occur, and what is the kind of corruption that is likely to occur at this stage? You know, let me take, for instance, the example of land corruption, because I know Hironga has worked on that a lot. People may not know, but for purposes of succession, do you know, if someone dies, the first level of corruption is the letter from the chief. The letter from the chief is supposed to list, by way of example, all the dependents of the deceased. You mark that as a point. You get? So if you're talking about families losing their land upon the demise, how does this happen? It starts from the lower level. What is the risk there? Then you go to the next level. Every stage, there must be serious key role players already mapped out. What is it that the law requires them to do, and how can they be held accountable to that? That requires awareness. You know, I think if the government is serious in fighting corruption, they must demonstrate that they have real corruption risk assessment tools, that there's the pervasive understanding of this tool, how it works, so that when we hear that a scandal has broken up, we know from what level did it start.
Where did it start?
You get? But if you just bombard us with news, primetime news, another scandal has emerged, someone has been suspended. By the way, by the time someone is being suspended, there's a lot of back-end processes going on, perhaps even to sanitize. You get? We want to know, what is the organizing philosophy in government? Is it a philosophy of being co-opted into the club of resource managers? So that when you're there, you know, when you're there, you're the privileged elite. When you're there,
and we all want to join.
And then you all want to join. Or is it the philosophy of beneficial leadership? I mean, the president is not open to him to say that I'm fighting corruption. What is the technique? What are the tools you're using to fight the corruption in government? Because you can't really tell, Waiga, we are in a post-2010 dispensation. In fact, this is very embarrassing, to say the least, because this constitution seeks to inspire national renewal in our technique of governance. You get? Can we really say that there's a paradigm shift pre-2010 and post-2010? I think we are stranded at the margins of time. We are struggling with the basic things as if we don't have a new constitution. In fact, looking comparatively, Uganda and Tanzania may be doing much better than us because they don't have the benefit of a robust infrastructure. We have an independent judiciary, independent key institutions of government that are not manipulable at the level of design. At the level of design, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution is not manipulable. At the level of design, the ESCC is not manipulable. Should not be manipulable within the Constitution. But are they truly, truly independent, or they are responding to external stimuli? Are they being activated elsewhere? The question is, these people that hold these offices, what is the organizing philosophy that informs these offices? Do they look at the offices as an opportunity to be co-opted into this club of elite resource managers, in which case now they just distribute, but to manage PR and to manage expectations, they release one scandal at a time, deal with it as others go undetected.
So something else
that
could
is
be
the
happening.
Question we need to address.
Let me allow Honorable Alwale to come into this. Members of Parliament saying they want to reduce NYS budget. Is that what we should be talking about right now? Bearing in mind the NYS in itself is not the problem. It is the people within that institution who do what we're being told about at this moment.
That is not the way to roll out punishment. They are frustrated, they want to punish somebody, and they're saying, let us reduce the budget. Okay, if they want to use that as a standard, i.e. reducing budget, then they will go to NCPBD and reduce the budget. Because it's also clearing, we saw.
We're actually coming to that one after the break.
So you can't go by reducing budget. It just goes back to the issue of ensuring that, as Council has said, institutions must work. And these institutions will never, ever work until the culture of impunity is not part of our value system. People just do things and they don't care. I mean, look, for example, the governor of Nairobi. Instead of addressing his problem of I'm insecure, he then tells people, what can you do? I can take your office to my house. I mean, and nothing is happening. How do you run a public office of the magnitude of the governor of Nairobi, a county that controls 60% of our economy? You take it to your house. For God's sake, that is not private property. That is called impunity. That mimi ni governor mtadu.
He's saying his life is under threat, Honorable Walole. Even you, I don't know if your life has ever been under threat.
It has been under threat many times, but we don't resort to those kind of antiques.
You haven't taken parliament to your home?
No.
You didn't take
I never even thought about it.
You didn't think about it?
No.
Just something brief.
Okay, briefly, and then we take a break.
The thing is this. The way governance is organized, we have sectoral players from the civil society, professionals. With them. If this government was serious in fighting corruption,
yes.
Let me use the Minister of Health by way of example. We have doctors, we have civil society organizations working in that sector. They should be involved every step of the way, explaining and knowing. It should come as a matter of course that even the whistleblowers are the key players, the role players, the stakeholders themselves. How do you unearth mafia scandal without the critical stakeholders not knowing? It means that in the first place they were excluded. The government must change the approach. This approach of making decisions in boardrooms, then communicating to stakeholders, using stakeholders to rubber stamp decisions that have been made without their participation, is the approach the Constitution has disallowed.
Okay.
We must revert to what the law requires, which means involvement of the people every step of the way. Not
Public
everyone, but
participation.
Sectoral players must be involved. So that when you are asking, this scandal has emerged, where is the civil society in that sector? So that in terms of accountability, because he also played a critical public watch role. Where was Irungu Horton when this corruption scandal was emerging? How come he didn't detect it? Why is he coming now to also complain? Yet he's a key player in that sector. That is the question we need to be asking.
I want to give
have
him
they been
a chance.
excluded or not?
I want to give him a chance to, even as you give us your thoughts as well.
So the first thing I think, Steve, is a very important point. So the deployment of state officers is a critical area. So whether it be at the level of the president or the level of the Public Service Commission, the question we should be asking is, when was the last time that this government actually appointed a whistleblower, a renowned whistleblower, an anti-fraud expert to head a position of authority and influence? And I don't think we've seen one in the last, let's take 90 days or even the last 5 years. And I think that's primarily the problem, that we are recycling people who we think are clean, but actually they are not a stand for integrity within the state. So that's the first thing. Let me give you another example from an area that I am familiar. Actually, let me, before I come to that. So we have appointments coming up. In fact, there's a round of interviews for different commissions at the moment, including the Commission for Administrative Justice. There is one person on that short list, and that is Samuel Kimeo, the Director of Transparency International. He tried to join the IEBC, scored very highly, was overlooked. Right? He's been here in your programs for many times, so you know him. He basically has applied for this position. It'll be a real litmus test for me whether somebody with his background is actually appointed to chair the Commission for the Administration of Justice. And I think the kind of risks that we need to see the government taking are those kind of calculated, I wouldn't even call them risks, opportunity creators, where you actually bring in whistleblowers into government. Now, just in case there are people listening and thinking I'm making a case for myself.
I was about to ask you that.
No, I joined Amnesty. I will remain there for a while. So I'm not interested in a position at the moment. But I think the point is that we need to see government beginning to give authority and responsibility to known whistleblowers, people the public respect and trust.
People that may have not spoken well about government in the past. And usually sometimes there's a danger with government that you only want those who speak well about you.
You know the reason why the issue of appointing people on merit is very important. Take, for example, the world's most paying industry today is soccer. For somebody to be appointed a coach of Arsenal Football Club.
This is not your favorite club, by the way.
No, mine is Manchester United. I'm thinking of Arsenal because they're the ones who have replaced
Emery has just been appointed.
You must have a good track history in management of the sport. So a good guy, like the way Houghton is saying, with that kind of history, it is the pedigree we need to bring into public office so that it makes a difference. Can you imagine you board an aircraft, you want to fly for 8 hours from Amsterdam to Nairobi, and then somebody tells you when you're mid-air that your pilot.
He's a journalist.
With no disrespect to hairdressers or to nursery school principals, but has a completely different pedigree from the one that is needed to fly.
Exactly.
Or a surgeon. Let me come to your area.
They say
The regular surgeon is not here, but we have got a lawyer.
let me go by the aircraft.
The aircraft example.
Yeah.
Briefly.
So you have a very qualified doctor, okay? He might be the best surgeon, plastic surgeon. Then you are told that our pilot today is the famous plastic surgeon who, purely because of circumstances, the regular pilot was not available, so we chose a very brilliant man who is a plastic surgeon. I mean, this is how we are running the country.
And if you want Botox, you can go to the back of the plane and he will take care of that as well.